Live.
It'll record, and it also does the live transcript, and then we can send that out later to people after the meeting.
Sure. Okay, I'm Ken Stevenson, and I want to first introduce the forum, which is something that we hope to reinvigorate here at TVUUC on a periodic basis, and I need volunteers to help organize that. So if you are interested, let me know. But let me introduce today our panel of two. And so on my right is Jon Shefner. He's a professor in the Department of Sociology at UT and a noted activist in labor and social issues. And our own Walter Davis on my left from TVUUC, also very active throughout his life, I think, in labor and social justice issues. So please welcome them, and I'll let them get started, and raise your hand if you have a question.
All right.
Go ahead, Jon.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in this early morning. Hope you have recovered from the game if you watched it. I want to express my appreciation to TV UUC for bringing us in. Very glad to be part of the forum. Now, I've been asked to speak about Constitutional Amendment 1, which is on the ballot. And this, to get on the ballot, the first process is an amendment has to be sponsored as a piece of legislation to go into amendment status by the General Assembly. Amendment 1, I think the thing you need to know most about it are two things. One, it limits the rights of working people to organize, and two, the legal aspect of Amendment 1 is already in legislation. So the attempt is to enshrine it in the Constitution in such a way that it will make it even harder for organizing workers. I'm going to stop for just a minute. There is something in the chat that I'm not going to be able to see. So is Claudia monitoring it? Or
I'll check.
Okay.
I am monitoring the chat, and
Great.
right now it just says that there is a recording in progress.
Okay, great. I just, flashed on the screen. I just wanted to make sure everybody was getting everything. So Amendment 1 makes the ability of workers to organize and join a union much more difficult by allowing those in a workplace that is protected by unions, by allowing them to refuse to join, but still enjoy all the contract benefits won by their coworkers. So what that means is it diminishes workers' ability to organize because workers can enjoy union benefits fought for and won by union members without either being a member or paying for representation. This kind of legislation was part of a rollback of union rights after 1945. Union rights were at their height in the 1932 to 1945 period. In 1947, the Taft-Hartley Act governing private sector employment prohibits what is called a closed shop, in which employees are required to be members of a union as a condition of employment. It allows, however, the union shop, or what's also called an agency shop, in which employees who are not union members pay a fee for the cost of representation without joining the union. right to work legislation, this is what this is called, right to work legislation, Amendment 1, which is a really problematic ideological label, right? Who can be against the notion of right to work? Well, the issue is, of course, it's not really about right to work. But right to work legislation, which is the law of Tennessee right now, goes a step further and entitles employees to the benefits of a union contract, including the right to have the union take up their grievances if their employer abuses them without paying any of the cost. So Amendment 1 would prohibit union security agreements between employees and employers, and labor unions, which requires employees who are not union members to contribute to the cost of union representation. Again, this has been the law of the land in Tennessee since 1947. The effort in Amendment 1 is to enshrine this law in the Constitution in order to make it harder to change, right? So think about being on the shop floor, being on an assembly line, being a worker in a school, being in a public service job. And basically it allows the worker next to you, in the office next to you, to freeload on your efforts to make your workplace a better paying, more secure, and safer place to make a living. Every law, every policy change should be able to ask and then answer the question, what is the problem that this policy or law seeks to resolve? What's the problem they're trying to solve? Unionized workers in Tennessee make up only 5.2% of our workforce. So why do we need a constitutional amendment? And to answer this question, I would say we should examine what Tennessee workers make, how unions make a difference, and even a little bit who's behind the anti-union amendment. And Ken, tell me if I'm going too long. How much money do Tennessee workers make? Well, much less than most across the United States. The median annual income of US workers is currently just above $54,000. In Tennessee, that comparable sum is just above $37,000. But there's median income and then there's living wage. And the MIT living wage calculator, an effort to find out county by county across the United States, how much it costs to really live a decent and dignified life. The living wage calculator for Tennessee tells us that for a two-person, one-worker household, the average living wage is $28.41 in the state of Tennessee. This is based on a 40-hour, 52-week work week. No time off for holidays. So that living wage with no vacations totals $59,000 a year, much higher than our median wage, and of course, much higher than the ridiculous federal minimum wage, which is also the state's minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. So what's the problem that requires this new amendment? It certainly is not a prevalence of high wage workers, making it hard for employers to make profits. The other question is then, what impact do unions have? According to the Economic Policy Institute, workers in unions earn an average of 10.2% more than their peers who are not organized. Unions set higher wage standards for all workers. Union workers are much more likely to be covered by employer health insurance plans than non-unionized workers. They have more paid vacations. They have more sick days. When women, Blacks, and Latinos in unions are paid considerably more than their non-union peers. And finally, workers without a union contract can be fired without cause, no questions asked. And so this is part of the reason, right? As well as years of inequality and years of problematic work conditions, that unions now have the highest favorability rating that they have had in decades, according to recent Gallup polls, which says that 70% of poll respondents favor unions and union organizing. And this is also why there is an increasing union organizing success across the nation. So it's not a coincidence that our two millionaire governors, current Governor Lee and ex-Governor Haslam, are chief backers of the effort. They each have a long history of anti-union activity. Governor Haslam, especially against the United Auto Workers in Chattanooga and against facility workers in universities across the state. I'm happy to talk more about those if you're interested. Other powerful supporters of Amendment 1 are large business owners and statewide chambers of commerce, whose interests are much more focused on employers than employees. As I end, I think it's really important to place this move, this effort to limit workers' rights consistent with another trend, which is polarization of income in the United States. So a few nuggets to remember about inequality in the United States. From 1979 to 2013, wages of the top 1% of income earners grew at a rate of 100, or a total rate of 138%, while the wages of the bottom 90% grew 15%. Wages of the bottom have certainly increased in the last few years, but are not closing the gap in significant ways. 2021 figures from the Economic Policy Institute finds that the typical CEO makes 350 times the salary of the typical worker. Corporate profits have been skyrocketing since 1990 and continue to do so. 62% of corporations in the state of Tennessee are paying absolutely no state corporate tax. And all of these trends are part of what I am also working on these days, which is deindustrialization, the shrinking of manufacturing as a sector of the economy in the United States, which has occurred simultaneous with a decreasing rights, pay, and benefits of manufacturing workers. This too has been simultaneous with a whole series of new incentives to industry to stay in place. A 2012 analysis found in a 10-year period, 1,900 programs nationwide, which distributed $80 billion to industry. This is a deep undercount, right? Just for giggles, thinking about Tennessee from 2010 to 2012, we spent $1.58 billion per year. That's $249 for every living person and 14 cents of every state budget dollar to keep or lure corporations through sales tax refunds, through exemptions or other sales tax discounts, and a variety of different kinds of tax incentive fundings. The state routinely makes offers and the legislature rarely rejects grants to companies that build new facilities or grow existing ones in Tennessee. One recent example is the new Ford plant outside of Memphis, to which the state has devoted almost $1 billion in incentives and aids in production. So and a very local example, of course, is the baseball stadium, which is being championed by UT President Randy Boyd. So while we're being asked to pass a constitutional impact that will have the impact of limiting workers' rights, we know that wealth and income is further polarizing and that working and middle-class people are falling further behind. And part of the mechanisms is that more and more public money goes to offset corporate costs, even while corporate profits are increasing. I think of these issues as related. There are a variety of things we can do in response, things that people like Walter Davis has done his whole professional life. You have to organize for your rights. You have to organize in the workplace. You have to organize for bodily autonomy, to protect education from book banning and the banning of teaching divisive concepts, to protect your right to vote and do away with the Electoral College for your rights to a clean vote. One of the first steps you can take is to vote no on Amendment 1.
Thanks, John.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
What happens in a union shop? So they have a contract for, I guess, for a particular period of time. I mean, if everybody just stops paying their dues and drops out of the union, is it still a union shop?
I mean, it is legally a union shop in the definition, but no one belongs to the union. Right?
And and when they strike, if they decide to strike in a contract dispute, the non-members, are they required to strike?
So in the scenario you're suggesting, nobody's going to organize a strike. Right. If you don't have union members in a shop, right, it's difficult for them to be organized. It's difficult for them to be protected. And I should know this better, Ken, but I'm pretty sure the law allows the firm to push the union out.
Oh. Now, but suppose there are a majority of the workers are in the union and they do call a strike. Do non-union members have to strike, or are they?
I don't think so, no.
No.
I see, yeah.
So it's one of these, again, you're suggesting another way that this kind of legislation weakens the role of unions in the workplace.
Yes.
It's also the atmosphere that's created. I mean, you're not going to get to the point of a strike vote because there's no organization that's capable of delivering it if you've been stripped of all your internal powers as an organization.
And
if the non-union people do choose to strike, can they be fired and the union members cannot be? What are the legal differences?
that's a really good question that I probably should know, Walter.
You see, these scenarios that you're throwing up are all kind of about things that wouldn't happen.
Right.
Simply because there's no structure of the union to guard people's rights.
Right.
And so if you're non-union in a union strike, you have no more rights than the union employees who've been stripped of their rights. So I don't think people would be voting for a strike.
And the vote to strike is the very hardest thing to
Right.
get working people to do.
Right.
Right. So strike votes have declined. And this, reinforces Walter's point, which is that, it's a scenario that wouldn't happen because there's no organizing structure. There's no set of folks who are going to be agitating for that.
And
If there is a strike, the union does pay something to the union members, right? But they would not give something to the non-union members. That would be.
Yeah.
that would be one of the first things that would be challenged by the non-union members, that you're denying me the benefits guaranteed under the
So that's
contract,
not clear.
but there's no revenue coming from the member dues to pay those. So it certainly disincentivizes people's interest in a vote on a strike because they know they're not going to get full salary anyway. And so they're just things that wouldn't happen because, and I can guarantee you that if this amendment passes, we're going to see a lot more state legislation that it takes away what's left. You already have the university employees that essentially don't have the right to a union, no matter that there is one. But
I mean, it's very difficult to organize a
Mhm.
shop in that way. I
Right.
mean, as you say, we do have a union, but I think Walter's absolutely right that, this kind of legislation ends up turning into more, right? And I don't think it's coincidental that this is happening just as Ford is entering into West Tennessee in an enormous fashion. And Governor Lee has already said he doesn't want the UAW there, even though Ford has said this is an expected part of
Right.
any Ford shop, right?
It was
And-
also a punishment by Governor Haslam because the Volkswagen
That's right.
employer voluntarily accepted the union,
That's right.
and he was furious
That's right.
that they went this route.
That's right.
And that's because they have an international tradition of working with unions. And so,
And back to that point of the use of public money, this is after that Chattanooga plant, VW plant, was heavily subsidized
right,
by state money, right? So again, you have the use of state money, but the diminishing or stripping of employee rights.
okay.
Walter?
There are four amendments on the ballot. Most Tennesseans don't know there are amendments on the ballot. They're going to show up at the polls and say, what the heck is that? And just as I would contend most Tennesseans didn't know slavery has never been banned in the state, nor has it been banned in the United States, despite our beliefs about the Emancipation Proclamation. That did not alter in fact, it was preserved in the both federal and state constitutions in the form of punishment for crimes. And, I've been at one point in my life was under a federal indictment. If I'd been convicted, I would have been stripped of my rights as a citizen to vote. But then there would be all kinds of other rights that would be lost in the process. We're talking about 2.5 million people in the United States that slavery through prison incarceration leads to their coverage. I have to apologize that in a life of working for justice and civil rights, that I wasn't aware of this. And if you had all your cameras on, I don't know how many of you would raise your hands saying you weren't aware of it either. And I have to say that there's been virtually no publication and promotion of a vote of yes on Amendment 3. And what is Amendment 3? It says there will be no longer slavery in the state of Tennessee. But the second sentence says we're going to preserve punishment in the form of forced labor on the part of prisoners or people convicted of crimes. By the way, prison labor under some of the for-profit prisons is like 17 cents a day that they're compensated. You cannot be rehabilitated coming out of prison having been paid 17 cents an hour. I think I said day, but it's about punishment. It's not about rehabilitation. And I think that we're on a road here that's kind of called the street of churches and synagogues. There should be a sign on every lawn up and down this road saying, vote yes on 3, and in support of it. It's a bipartisan measure to support this change in our Constitution. It's being directed by former Senator Corker, and our county mayor is a member of the committee. I understand they've raised like $8 million to run an educational campaign. You may be seeing some ads. I haven't seen speeches by public officials except for Gloria Johnson, who's talked about it. And that's where we are on public education about the why. Why is it that at this point in history, after all these decades and century and a half, we haven't bothered to amend the state constitution? And we get this passed on the state level. We need to work on the national constitution. We need to amend the federal constitution to eliminate slavery in any form. And one of the problems with if we get this passed and we remove slavery, involuntary servitude is still in state constitutions. By the way, since everybody's celebrating yesterday, the football game, maybe you should have a goal of a competition with the state of Alabama who are also voting, and turn out and have more support for opposition to slavery than the state of Alabama, because they're also voting the same day on this. And I hope to see some sense of competition in how many people will turn out to vote against slavery. I hear some excuses for not voting for it, for not voting for 3, because of the second sentence that preserves the right to forced labor in the prisons. If you choose to go that route, if you choose to ignore that part of the ballot, you're voting for it. You're voting against it being passed, because the complicated amendment structure requires not only a majority on that vote, but it has to equal 50% plus 1 of the number of people that vote for governor, all the candidates for governor. So I actually did some calculations. If there was a last minute talking campaign to get people to not vote, that 55% of the people could vote, yes, we want to end slavery in the Constitution, and it still fail, because it may not be enough. And I've never been confident that this ballot will result in a yes victory, because like in the primary campaign, when I voted, I had a worker in the polls say, you don't have to, if you don't understand the judge's part of the ballot, just ignore it, and it'll be fine. That kind of advice, if somebody tells you, if you don't understand the amendments, just skip them. Well, actually, you've contributed to the defeat of the amendment, because if people then go ahead and vote for governor, then that calculation is that not voting is effective in defeating the resolution. So please don't get caught up in that. We need to work on the rights of prisoners. We need to do education about punishment and the difference between rehabilitation and simply punishment. And we have to realize also that the actions towards prisoners is heavily race-based. That you can say, well, it's all prisoners, white, black, whatever, and so it's not racially defined servitude. It absolutely is, because of the biases built into our legal system that place people of color disproportionately into jeopardy in the system, from the moment of the level of charges through legal protections and defense, and through the sentences that are mediated out. And we should know the President of the United States took some action on nonviolent drug crimes this week, and that was heavily reflective of the lack of equality in sentencing. And so I think slavery will still exist after we move the Constitution, move it out of the Constitution, in other forms. Forced labor, servitude is still a form of slavery. But for gosh sakes, let's start with the clearest opportunity we have to start to roll it back. John? Yes.
So a question, maybe you can read the new wording.
The new wording is, shall Article 1, Section 33 of the Constitution be amended to delete the section and substituting instead the following. Slavery and involuntary servitude are forever prohibited. Nothing in this section shall prohibit an inmate from working when the inmate has been duly convicted of a crime. And so
this is what you are talking about when you're talking about forced work in the prison. So this has no effect on that.
right.
Is that required of prisoners or is it voluntary on the prisoner's part?
I don't know of any voluntary options for prisons. Somebody else might be familiar with that and can come into the conversation, but you're inside an environment you don't control. So I can't imagine. And one of the problems with the confusion is around all the amendments is that these are folks who don't control the working conditions. They don't control the health conditions. So they may not be able to do certain jobs, but they're compelled to do it. And it's hard to get your lawyer to come in and say, well, I'm being forced to do labor that I can't do. And so it's one of many problems with it. But it also becomes an excuse for those people who are looking for an excuse how to vote. They're going to say, oh, and this is the kind of whisper campaign I think is going on right now, is that, well, these people should be compelled to pay their own way, should pay for the wonderful things we do for them through the prison system. And it becomes another excuse to abstain or to vote against it. And I do not presume that people won't be urged to vote against this amendment on the basis of that excuse.
I heard one of the descriptions of why this was in place, and this was the Jim Crow era.
Yeah.
Because prisoners could be basically used by industry.
Mm-hmm.
And is that still the case in a sense? I don't know.
Well, they're working for somebody.
Yeah.
They're working for
That's
somebody.
17 cents an hour is,
Yeah.
you know, whatever value they are producing, and it's a whole lot more than 17 cents an hour is certainly going to somebody.
And in some states, their call centers are
That's
being
right.
run out of prisons. And it started, it was the Jim Crow way of compensating for the loss of slavery. So we had people who were under contract labor. We had the chain gangs. We had all kinds of ways in which the black codes, which you may know more about than I do. And then mass incarceration, which mass incarceration exists because it's profitable. You know, you don't spend that kind of money and not have some use of it. For-profit prisons are profitable because of exploitive labor that does not compensate people so they can look to a different life after they leave imprisonment. And so, yes, it still exists today. That the basis on which the Jim Crow is still with us very much, and every day in every courtroom, I think.
We might mention the other two amendments.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to, state.
Can somebody ask a question?
Yeah,
Sure.
I'm Charlie Anderson. You're recommending we vote yes, right?
on three.
On 3.
Right, but it doesn't
Go on one.
it still say in 3, it still says that prisoners can work, right?
Yep.
So why do we want to vote for it?
Because if you don't, we're gonna deliver a message from Tennessee that we support slavery. It's that simple.
And then,
Because right now but it's already in the Constitution that prisoners can work, right?
And what's your point? That means we keep the slavery?
Well, it looks like voting yes, we would be getting new language that says they can still work, right?
One of the problems is we're dealing with two different issues here. One is slavery, and so
Okay,
they conveniently stuck on prison labor to be preserved. But that's true whether, prison labor is going to be exploited unless we do some organizing. But
okay.
first of all, let's get rid of slavery.
Okay, so we'll vote for it because of the first sentence, not because
Right.
of the second. Okay, thank you.
Right.
and then as Walter said, the task is to organize around that
Okay.
second piece.
All right,
So anybody that tells you they're not voting it because of the second sentence, say, then let's form some work on getting humane conditions in prisons.
so we'll do it one step at a time.
Can you give some
Okay.
examples of what kind of slavery might exist right now in Tennessee outside of the prisons? And also, talk about human trafficking laws and what, is there a difference between human trafficking and slavery? It seems like there's a more impetus to have laws against human trafficking. And what kinds of laws are there to protect people right now? It's sort of a lot of questions, but.
There are a lot of questions there.
Well, I know. Well, what kinds of examples? I guess the question is, why do we want to vote for this if we don't have slavery at all?
But we do have slavery.
Outside
That's
of the prisons. But what kinds of examples?
Yeah, but you also create a set of preconditions so that you can't have voting rights. And a lot of states don't allow voting rights forever for people who've been convicted of crimes. I have a friend who's just because he doesn't have opposition, has been elected to the legislature. He has a criminal record and on really false kind of crimes, but they could choose to go after him. And so they're all, and then there's things about getting certain jobs, your record being used to deny you legal rights in other cases. It sets a whole pretext for discriminatory crimes or punishments well beyond the day you leave prison or leave jail.
I think
would that be affected by this amendment? It seems like talking about slavery on one hand, but also voting rights. Those are two
But
different
I
issues.
think part of what this does as well is it provides a legal status that is useful for a lot of anti-discrimination work. So one of the places where people are bound in this country to work off certain debts, just for example, are undocumented immigrants who are brought into the country with a substantial amount of debt to the people who have brought them in, on the one hand, right? And so I could see a case whereby in a system where these folks were not afraid to come to a legal redress, to say that that is in effect a wage slavery, right? Another, which is much more common, certainly in agricultural labor, or has been for many years, is to bring in contract laborers, right? And contract agricultural laborers live in really poor housing supplied by their employer and get paid really poor wages, again, supplied by their.
Excluded from the right to fair wages.
Right. And so explicitly banning slavery provides a legal redress to say, well, isn't this slavery? And so provide a legal status, a legal foundation to question some really problematic labor practices as well. It's certainly, as Walter has said, really not problematic, unjust and inhumane within the prison system. But it does have, we know that every foundation of greater human rights embedded in law provides more basis for us to argue against discrimination of a variety of sorts.
John asked that we maybe also touch quickly on the,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Ken, I saw John in the hall. On the other two amendments, I don't really have an opinion on the First Amendment. I probably would vote for.
On the second one.
I mean, the second one, it's an administrative succession thing that I think it's been an oversight that they hadn't done it before, and so they throw it in to this gaggle. It's the fourth one that I do have an opinion on, and it was a bit of, I'm not an expert on constitutions, so I had to go back and learn a lot about how they're passed in the state of Tennessee. And the first time I ever worked on the constitutional amendment campaign was 1966 in Kentucky, and we lost badly. The fourth one in this year's election deals with ending denial of the right of certain religious figures to serve in the legislature. In principle, given the history of the civil rights ministers, I certainly want them to have a right to be part of the legislators if elected. However, it identifies specific types of ministers of the gospel, and they're Christian and priests. There are Christian definitions of what is a religious figure, while leaving the denial of the right of atheists to serve in the legislature, even though we know it's already been excluded from by the courts. It's still there, and I think when things are left like that, there's a reason for it. And so I can't vote for the amendment as it's currently stated.
Number 4, you're a no.
I'm a no on 4.
Can you?
But
Take the wording.
It's right here. I'll give you a
People
because
don't have that right.
it's asked to amend this Constitution by deleting section 1, which is the only one that defines certain ministerial categories from being
and people who are atheists from.
That's a later
That's
section.
a later
It's not
section,
dealt
so
with.
it's leaving that one.
It leaves it becomes section 1, and that atheists are not allowed to serve our people who are actively opposed to the definitions of the first category. So I find that to have been an intentional exclusion to leave the punishment of atheists in the state constitution to deny them rights.
And 2, as Walter had said, is a basic succession amendment. When the governor is incapable of serving, appoints the Speaker of the House in that person's place,
Right.
which seems basically a bureaucratic to
Yeah.
serve bureaucratic function.
But to sum up, I think your signs are helpful there. And I've seen the no on 1 signs. I haven't seen the yes on 3 signs, as Walter points out. So are there any questions from the audience?
We have just a little while left. So. Oh.
Do want to remind you that early voting begins on Wednesday.
Yeah.
Do want to remind you of Walter's point that if you vote for governor, You have to vote on these amendments. Otherwise, you have voted against the amendments.
Right. And if any worker volunteering at the polls otherwise tells you you don't have to vote on things you don't understand, that's an interference in the ballot. And I've talked to the Blount County Elections Office about that problem, that with the best of intentions, the people at the polls may be interfering in the election process. So let's call them out. I have a quote. It's actually a book John edited with some other folks called Social Justice in the University in 2014.
Yeah, a while
And
ago.
I have a chapter in it critiquing the University of Tennessee. And I quoted Jerry Bone on what you've got to do if you understand the vote on 3. In the end, social justice is very personal. Show up. There are lots of problems with which are affecting you now or will affect you in the future. Endless war, climate change, and increasingly violent, wealthy weather events, rather. Nuclear accidents, privatization and deregulation, prisons specializing in contact and mind control, to name a few. Show up. Stop waiting for someone else to fix it. If you understand this issue, you have to talk to people, because and if competing with Alabama helps, beat Alabama at ending slavery, because they're voting on it too.
Okay, well, I want to thank both of you for coming and for giving this forum. And thank you, people, for attending. And look forward to forums in the future. So watch the newsletter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
So Walter, I need to tell you real briefly about